Hi friends! If you're new here, welcome. In this video, I'm going to be making a Bridgerton-inspired Regency era dress. The undergarments I already made in my last two videos, which will be linked up here. In my last video, I showed you how to draft, or how I drafted some Regency stays, and the video before that, I actually made them and I also made a shift. But I will not be focusing on the construction and creation process of this dress. Instead, I'm going to be talking about my opinions and thoughts about season 2 of Bridgerton. You'll see clips of me making the dress interspersed in this video, but mainly this is actually going to be a commentary video. There will be spoilers, maybe not super heavy spoilers. I'm just going to kind of talk about it as someone who's seen the show, but if you don't want spoilers, maybe go watch the show and come back. So first of all, I want to say that I think this is a very complex and nuanced topic, and I know that the internet struggles a lot with nuance, but I'm going to try to help that and really bring a lot of different ideas and thoughts to the table here. So first of all, I enjoyed the show. I will say that. I want to talk about a few key words that I'm going to use to describe things, mainly diversity, inclusion, representation, and decolonization. To like sort of define those words, not that these are like end-all be-all definitions, but small definition. Diversity is like, who is here? Does everyone have the same experiences, the same skin color, the same cultural background? Inclusion is about who's not here and can we invite them? Representation is an interesting one because there are a lot of different definitions of representation. We use the phrase representation in media to mean literally just seeing someone of a certain culture, of a certain background or marginalization. But other definitions of representation include that actually being like an accurate portrayal or someone really fighting for the rights or for the life of a person. The legal definition of like a lawyer represents a person, they fight for that person, which I think is an interesting distinction. But moving on from that, decolonization, and this is one that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about in regard to this show, but I think it's important. Decolonization doesn't ask who's at the table, it asks who built the table, which is something that a lot of us won't even think about because it's like, why question it? There's a table, but decolonization requires you to really take a deep look at what standards you're holding people to and what you're holding as an ideal, and to kind of pull that up by the roots. Also, there are of course other definitions, and decolonization can be much more concrete, but like ideologically, that's at least how I think of it. With that out of the way, Bridgerton is a screen adaptation of a romance novel written by, or a series of romance novels written by a white woman with pretty much exclusively white characters. And I think that's an important thing to say about this show because of that, I believe that this show and this story cannot be decolonized. People will say that this show is like racism free or colorblind, and I don't really see that, honestly. I see that it has diversity casting, and I don't say that to undermine the talent and the skill of the Indian and other POC actresses, but diversity is trending. It's 2022. Everyone wants to look inclusive. They cast it diversely because they wanted to meet that standard, and I think that meets the status quo. I don't really think it pushes anything. The thing about just seeing someone who looks like you on screen, you have to remember that like black people have been used in advertising in the US in the 1920s, probably since before then, but you see a ton of it in like the 20s, and they didn't get the right to vote. Like black women didn't get the right to vote until 45 years later in 1965. Just seeing someone's face, just seeing a face that isn't white, does not mean that that person has rights. It doesn't mean that person is seen as human. It doesn't mean it's an accurate portrayal of that person. So simply seeing a person is not enough, and it doesn't really do anything to combat racism or white supremacy. And with that being said, when you have something like, also, okay, disclaimer, I have not read the books. I haven't read the books, but I'm gonna make some assumptions, which I feel like are pretty safe assumptions to make, which is that this book is colonial and white supremacist, not in that the author went out of her way to make it that way, but just in that she probably wasn't putting the huge amount of effort that it would take to not have those ideas in the book as a white author writing a historical fiction romance. So I feel like it's pretty safe to say that this book was written with white supremacist ideas, with colonial ideas, with colonial and white supremacist standards of beauty and views and everything. So the fact that they decided to cast it in 2020 or 2021, or whenever they decided to cast this, with Indian actresses in the lead, doesn't take away from the fact that the source material is white supremacist and has colonial ideas. So the Indian representation in this show is very much an afterthought. And this is pretty apparent when you look at the response of a lot of Indian people to this show, the way that they portrayed Indian culture. And of course, I'm not an expert in any means, like my knowledge of Indian culture is like basically non-existent, but from what I've heard, like the words that they used to describe their family members were like not even from the same place, and just the elements of Indian culture that they used were so spread out. It wasn't, the characters weren't like actual Indian people. They were like this kind of, like a generalization of kind of some elements of different Indian cultures, because you have to remember that India is like a huge place with tons of different languages and dialects and cultures and people, and like they're not a monolith. All of the elements of the way that they showed Indian culture were, I mean, some of them were completely inaccurate, like the way they made chai. They were not authentically Indian characters. They were white characters who had their last name changed from Sheffield to Sharma, and a little backstory written for them. Did they try to include elements of Indian jewelry and fabric into the costuming? From what I've heard and seen, they did, but again, it was an afterthought. It's Regency England with a little tiny sprinkling of Indian culture, not like an authentically Indian character. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that the actresses who play Kate and Edwina, Simone Ashley and Charithra Chandran, got literally zero say in the way that Indian culture was portrayed in this show. I'm pretty sure they weren't allowed to give any kind of feedback or have any say in the way that their own culture was portrayed. Although Charithra did say that she made sure that Indian artists and artisans were paid for their work behind the scenes, which is a good thing, but kind of a bare minimum. There are some things, like the fact that a darker skinned woman was portrayed as beautiful and romantically desirable and sexually desirable in a way that wasn't super fetishy, was something that we don't see a whole lot of in Western media. And in that sense, I think myself and a lot of other non-white people appreciated seeing that, because we just don't see that. Especially having like a dark-skinned woman be attractive not only to dark-skinned men, but like to everyone. I do think that maybe you can make an argument for this show being a little bit of progress as far as diversity, but the thing is that diversity and inclusion only goes so far, because you have to remember that those things are both about bringing people and allowing people to sit at a table, and that table is already created in a white supremacist way, and that table is colonial and white supremacist. As far as the romance and the acting side of the show, I honestly really enjoyed it. I felt like they really drew out this tension and the connection between Anthony and Kate, and Kate in a really nice way. The way that they built up the romance and the tension, I thought was beautiful and really well done. I can see an argument for Edwina being chosen as the diamond being a little bit of a decolonization of beauty standards, but at the end of the day, she was a brown woman, but she was embodying this white standard of beauty where she followed white people's rules, played by their book, wore their clothing, like she was thin, able-bodied. The one plus-size character is not portrayed as attractive at all. As a whole, I think that the ideas pushed in this show are colonial and are white supremacist, and I'm not saying that in that I think it's like more than most Western media. I think it's similar, but also most Western media has white supremacist ideas and has colonial ideas in it. At the end of the day, I think this show was just meeting the status quo. I'm not mad about it, but I don't think it was progress. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as a romance. I did personally feel like having Kate and Edwina cast as Indian rather than white added to the show for me, but I know that it took away for a lot of Indians just because of how poorly they were represented as Indian culture, and how kind of stereotypically and not, like their Indian backstory was not full and rich and accurate. It was kind of an afterthought. I would love to see a historical fantasy romance with people of all different cultures wearing their own cultural dress, and that's really decolonized in the idea of family and living and love is decolonized. I would love to see that show, and if someone with a lot of money wants to pay for that to be made, that would be amazing. As it is, like, Bridgerton is already like progressive as far as what media is pushing currently. It's capitalism, it's white supremacy. You can't really expect anything different. I wish we could. I mean, this is the world we live in. It was gorgeous, I enjoyed it. Was it progress? Not really, but it was what it was, and I'm not really mad at it. I do think there are a lot of things that could have pretty easily been a lot better, such as the details, like if they had just changed the details and the way that Indian culture was portrayed a little bit so that it wasn't necessarily decolonized, but it was at least a little more accurate, like that would have been something. So at the end of the day, I enjoyed this show, but I don't think it necessarily made any meaningful progress. Anyways, if you want to see this dress, keep watching. If you want to see more videos like this where I share my opinions on things, let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you next time. Bye!